Hello, it's great to have everyone here today. It is a pleasure to be with Justin and to have the opportunity to introduce him. Justin has been in the world of technology and human rights for the last 10 years and is now the founder and CEO of FRDM and Made in the Free World. And FRDM is an enterprise grade software company trusted by Fortune 500 countries to identify, measure, and mitigate risks of modern slavery, deepen their supply chain. We're going to go into a lot of detail, but Justin is also known particularly for his directorial debut of the film Call and Response. And I'm going to ask a little bit more details on some of that experience because I think people will still want to hear more of that work. And actually, we had a little bit of unexpected overlap when I was at the US State Department, and he created the slaveryfootprint.org. I actually just went to the website, so everyone should still visit that today and keep learning about what is going on and how we're all part of this modern slavery world and that we need to be addressing it. Justin, I just want to dive in today. And again, thank you for being part of this conversation.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Great. A little bit just about myself. You know, one of the reasons that they set us up today was because of my work in human rights. I've been working in human rights for a number of years across textile, apparel, and now into technology. I came to technology much later, having been more of a field person. And, you know, some of the work that I really wanted to talk to you about is just how we're looking at these supply chains today and what are the challenges we're facing, you know, despite technology advances and I think awareness, we still have modern slavery. So maybe could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as the challenges today, both in transparency of modern slavery, as well as why it's not being addressed? And we can kind of start from there.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question I have is why haven't we had this conversation sooner, Carrie? I think that we did a prep call and we were like, wait, why haven't we had that? I know, we live in the same area. Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
Exactly.
Well, maybe to kind of understand today, it might make sense to maybe go back to when our lives were overlapping a little bit at the State Department and what was happening 10 years ago at the State Department. Not the State Department, but in the world of working on modern day slavery. During that time, I had just put out a film. I'd come out of the music industry, actually, and really cared about the issue, wanted to do something, wanted to get my community involved, which were musicians. And, you know, we're pretty good at doing concerts and songs and not much else. And so I just didn't feel like that was going to be enough to really get the word out about modern day slavery. And so decided to do a documentary or a rockumentary that would, you know, find its way into theaters. That was the hope, and it did. And it kind of, I didn't expect to, you know, I hoped to go back to just working on my records and working on music. But what I found was I was kind of out there speaking about this issue. And for me, you know, having a background in performance, you always want to give people something that they can hold on to and make their own, right? And so, you know, white papers are awesome. It's not something that people can make their own. Laws are great. It's just not something that people can make their own. And if you want to really create a movement, people need to see themselves connected to it. And the one way in which we're all connected to modern day slavery is through our purchases. And so in the film, I really focused on, hey, how are we connected to this issue through the things we purchased? I remember when we were making the film, we created some technology in the back end of it, which was a letter writing campaign to companies. And it was nice. It wasn't mean. It was very much our perspective was we're going to give companies data about consumer intent, consumer will around this issue, and kind of help companies understand that they're consumers that do care about this. Again, this is 10, 12 years ago. I actually I did a test email back in the day, 2007. I sent a test email to Steve Jobs. We got his email address, wasn't hard to get. We also knew that he was the only one that responded to his email. We're like, hey, it can't hurt. And we sent him a message that said, hey, do you know about this mineral called cobalt in the iPhone. It's mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I know a lot of us on this call know what that is now, but 12 years ago, not so much, right? And so, I just kind of get a little pithy email like, let us know, don't send this to your general counsel, just tell us you care. 4 hours later, I got an email back that said, I had no idea, I'll look into it, signed Steve, and at the bottom, it said sent from my iPhone, which I thought was kind of ironic. And I think, first of all, pretty, for a bunch of us that were just a bunch of knuckleheads that were just caring, we're just like, oh my gosh, this can work. We can connect the dots. And that was a moment where, gosh, you know what? There is just incredible goodwill, incredible intent. If we can start to connect the dots around this, that's something that really is something that we want to get behind. And so soon thereafter, I got called by the State Department to work with them to connect more dots for consumers around, with slavery footprint. And they literally said, do something like carbon footprint, do it in a year, make sure that you include people, be nice, don't be dumb, make sure that you're doing it intelligently. And I thought this was such a great way to tell more stories, which is how can we tell the stories of consumers connecting to this, never expecting. Our goal was to get 150,000 people to know their slavery footprint within a year. We launched it and reached that goal within an hour. And to date, I think it's like 50 million people know their slavery footprint off of like a small $200,000 State Department grant. Google got involved and helped, and because the site kept breaking because we didn't build it for scale. But the data from that, the data from that says, wait, there's tremendous will. And if there's anything about making change in the world, and I know this conference is all about that, you need will and way to create change. You can't just have will, and you can't just have a way. And we all know this, and change takes time, and it's all about timing. But we're just seeing this tremendous will. And one of the things that it did back to the State Department and the Obama administration, it gave, frankly, some political will to start closing some tariff acts and requiring federal contractors to now disclose. And we've seen since that time, it's ironic now with the company Freedom. I know we don't have any vowels, we couldn't afford it, we're a startup, but our company's called Freedom, FRDM. And the thing about one of the jobs that we do with Freedom now 10 years later is help companies comply with laws that we kind of, with slavery footprint had a hand in helping start. So I would love to say it was self-serving. We're not that intelligent, but it was a way in which we're just kind of seeing this loop. And I kind of feel like we're in this 10-year loop now of there was incredible will years ago, not just in the public, but was that the public will and the consumer will created the political will. And now it's creating a business will. And so I'm seeing that things are accelerating, and we're nowhere near the conversations I have with governments and companies. They just weren't happening 10 years ago. So we are seeing an acceleration. And the acceleration is we need to understand our supply chains. Supply chains have just been this big black box of secrets that no one's really, frankly, there hasn't been the will to open up that box and understand and start to build resiliency and an understanding. And I think the understanding of where things come from in the world is creating that will from lots of different angles.
Absolutely. Well, and I will say I also benefit from being able to make some of those action on the corporate side with people like you. When you're able to tap into that will, practitioners that are trying to do it on one side or another, NGOs, government, or companies, they need that will to be activated and seen. So, my career, sort of coupled and was in parallel with some of the work you're doing and other key, transformation, transparency actors. And the story you said about Steve Jobs, I eventually went to Apple, and I would get those direct forwards from a CEO or other C-level and say, what are we doing on this? I don't think people totally appreciate that, for all of the talk about, executives being kind of untouchable, or they, these sort of things that can make them seem other. a lot of these people are just humans, and they want to know that they're on the right side of history as well, and that they're leading these activities. And so it gives them momentum. It gives the people in the companies that. So couldn't emphasize that enough, how many terrifying emails I would get from very senior people because of people like you. So I think that's excellent. A couple things, other groups that sort of coupled in your world, you see the Greenpeace is taking more of an environmental lens, but still kind of overlapping in that what is going on in your supply chain. And then the Enough and the Global Witness types also in the world, but then stretching into diamonds and these other materials outside of electronics. It all starts getting that momentum and maybe a virtuous spiral up, if you so to speak, that I think is incredibly powerful. Well, let's talk a little bit about specifically what barriers. You said resiliency at the end of your comments, and we hear that word a lot. It's thrown out a lot, and I think from a personal level, a community level, in the pandemic, what is resiliency in our world today? What does that mean in terms of modern slavery? And then what are organizations' barriers to that resiliency, or supply chains barriers, or so on? Maybe you can tap into some of those thoughts that you have.
Yeah, the term resilience is kind of like what purpose was 2 years ago, right? It's the current marketing buzzword, and then it's gonna be replaced with something else. But for it's
still
here
valuable,
for now.
but
it's here for now, and it's on us to define it, right? And the way we define resilience is kind of taking a management approach to it's hard to fix what you can't measure. It's very easy around sustainability and ethics issues, challenges, to get very upset and very dystopian very quickly. It's just so important to know that all of those feelings around being upset about the world, literally nothing's changed in the world because we feel something for it. Things only change when we turn that feeling into some action. And that, to me, is where art meets science, is moving action or moving feelings into action that can be qualified and measured. And that's where change gets super, super boring. Supply chains are inherently boring. So passing laws are it's inherently boring. It's just an arduous process. And it's these incremental wins and 2 steps forward, 1 step back, where change is really happening. And at that point, all the feelings and intensity has gone away, right? But you see that in 2012, there was a lot of focus on modern slavery, and a lot of that went away. And I think it's good, because the work has just been done and the laws are being passed. And now we're hearing terms like supply chain due diligence, and possibly even some countries are looking into creating fines for executives, which I don't endorse, but fines for executives, that don't follow this, or tying executive pay to transparent. This is all new work. I think that one of the challenges that the way that I define resilience is something that you can measure. Do you know, and we call it on our platform, we have a resilience score that actually measures how much you know about your supply chain. We call it data resilience. And you'd be surprised and maybe horrified to know that most companies have no idea what they're actually buying. In some cases, they don't even know the names of the suppliers they're buying from, because there's so many, layers deep. And it's really important to recognize that, first of all, have grace. That's how business has been done. We're living in a new world, and it's going to take time to change. And understanding what you buy and who you buy from is the new level, is how you build resilience. Because as we've seen with the pandemic, some of the things the challenges that we're facing, you and I live in California, lumber has gone up 4x. No one can buy homes. It's just, the housing market is crazy. You can't get anything. That's a supply chain issue. If you want to buy a car right now, a used car is 40% more than it was last year. It's a supply chain issue. And so, and I would argue that that's a lack of resilience in supply chain issue, because people don't know and can't see what's coming. And you can do that for logistics and go, why don't we have the wafers? Why don't we have the mills working? That's a logistical operational resilience. But there's also an ethics and sustainability resilience. What is going on in our Malaysian palm oil factory? What is going on in northern China where people are being forced to work to pick the tomatoes that go into our ketchup? And by the way, 4th of July is coming, this can't be. I mean, these are the types of things that we just are new conversations to us. So the number one challenge that companies face when it comes to resilience, as far as I'm concerned, is data. You just don't know. And it's something that you have to begin and do the incremental boring change of building out transparency in your supply chain.
Well, there's so many things that I want to pull out from this, but I think you're saying data, but you're also talking about and being able to act on it, right? And I think what I love about where you started and it kind of interwoven through this conversation is you can take action, and companies have leadership and they can do those things. And I'll give you an example. I've been asked recently, I am that like nerdy, boring, regulation, send me out and do bilateral trade discussions, that kind of thing. So I am that person doing that constantly. And it's part of my world, but I put everyone to sleep very quickly. But some of the things that I've been asked to really comment on with some academics, there's a lot of, I mean, to your point, that governments are having conversations they've never had. They're also funding work that's never been funded before. Like, how do we look at big data? There's, National Science Foundation grants that University of Maryland have won, and others that are talking about how do you identify illicit actions in supply chains. And then what I'm here engaging is, and then how do you address it to not scare off someone, to not scare off a company, to say it's worth addressing it. And some of the things that I think are layered into the work you do and the resiliency is to say, this is scary and you may not know 4, 5, 6 layers deep exactly what's going on, but it's worth addressing it and you can. We had, speaking of 12 years ago when people were talking about, coltan and tin and other material conflict minerals coming from Congo, certain companies were taking a, let's say, zero tolerance, which basically meant try to avoid Africa, which is not possible in the world of minerals. But what was really powerful is when companies started saying, no, we're going to participate in the process. And our benchmark is how much are we engaged and how much action can we influence and can we take these actions forward? And then to your point, it's the metrics that matter. Are you measuring the thing that drives the action you want to have, not letting perfect or avoidance of risk being the goal, and I'd love to, maybe how can technology from Freedom's work and what you've done in the past, how are you engaging in actions and data transparency for actions? Maybe, speak a little bit more about what Freedom's doing, and I'd love to throw in a little bit about what we're doing as well.
Yeah, I think that, everyone's wondering who holds the report card when it comes to ethics and responsibility and sustainability. And I don't know, do you know? Does anyone give the final grade in the world? I think that's what executives are struggling with. Like, who do I listen to? Do I listen to the government? Do I listen to my investors? Like, who's giving that? And I think that paralysis of analysis is one of the challenges. And what we try to do with our customers, we have obviously we're quite fond of our customers, but we run our company like a movement. And we believe that our customers are the first movers in a movement for transparency. And so our job is, we're not Luke Skywalker, we're Yoda. We're like behind, like doing our best to give, teach them about the force of transparency. That's super nerdy, but like that, the idea being that they're on a hero's journey themselves. And quite frankly, they're early movers. And and we try to help our customers understand this continuum that executives and leaders have to measure themselves against. That on one side there's compliance, and another side there's responsibility. And responsibility doesn't end; it just kind of keeps going, right? But marketing departments would like to believe that we'll put the company on the responsibility side, but the reality is that the real report card is, are we just checking boxes, or are we being curious and trying to push into the unknown and move us more and more? And that's really hard to, that's a real challenge to get people to believe that progress actually is the report card, not perfection.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do with, we were surprised. I mean, we started our company to build ethical supply chains. That was it. Now we're moving into sustainable supply chains. But the first thing we had to do is, frankly, we had to clean the sock drawer. You know, supply chains are like a sock drawer where none of the socks match. And you've got to go in and exactly, you've got to go in and go, this goes here, whites go over here, stripes go here, colors go here. Just that the data transformation of being able to help our customers understand, here's what you're buying, here's who you're buying it from. Here's one of the tools that we have is we call it product genomics. Essentially, it's a predictive bill of materials where you will tell us, hey, we're buying laptops, or we're buying hydraulic pumps. And we'll actually figure out, our technology can figure out what are the raw materials that go into it. So literally for like a consulting company that would be working with, like we can tell Accenture how much gold they're purchasing in a year through the things that they're buying. And so, and while that might be an exercise in too much information, what it does is it starts to demonstrate what is knowable. And when you can get a sense of, okay, wow, we now know that 80% of our suppliers are nowhere near risk. We don't need to look at those. Gosh, there's 10% here that have some inherent risk just in the things that we're buying, or in some cases, we're able to do searches on their suppliers. And I've been on calls with customers over the last couple of weeks where, you know, 2 layers down, there's a US sanctioned supplier out of China, and they just didn't know. And it was like that. Like it was, and so those conversations are interesting because now there's something to do. And that's really where, as a company internally, every company has its own barometer in terms of compliance responsibility. The responsible thing to do is like, okay, we've got the conversation. And that doesn't mean kick them out. It might mean that supplier that you're working with doesn't even know. And so that's where you as a company get to come and say to your buyer, your supplier, gosh, just so you know, this is what's going on. And also, we can't have that. That's in our supply chain. We can't do that. So you're gonna have to deal with that. And so those are some of the ways in which we kind of, you know, organize the socks for them and then start helping them understand insights deeper down and apply risk analysis so that they can use, and we really are a procurement tool. We don't sit in the sustainability side of the business. We sit in procurement because they're the ones that write the checks. And we just happen to believe that that's one of the best ways to create behavior change is when, you know, the dollar's over the barrel, and you can get people's attention. So that's one of the ways we do that.
Well, I couldn't agree more. For as difficult as the world of procurement and operations are, particularly in very fast-moving global supply chains, across the work I've done, and when I've sat in an operations group as a sustainability or materials expert, that's where the game is. So I couldn't emphasize that more in terms of practitioner experience. Can you talk to me a little bit about, you know, and let me frame this. One of the reasons that I ended up leaving Apple to go to a jewelry company was because the consumers in the jewelry industry have a much more emotional attachment to their product. And we see this in brand loyalty scores. You see this in how companies have done reviews of, you know, do you care if this product or this product is made with child labor, forced labor, and a jewelry product will go way up in terms of, you know, what matters. And then the other products people will still buy regardless. There's an assumption that this is just how it is, but when this is for my anniversary or a special occasion, it's really important. So you see the jewelry industry have really unusual, compared to other consumer products, claims and focus on certain types of goals and initiatives. Now, they've also had huge problems, obviously, as we've seen with movies like Blood Diamond and other documentaries, and, you know, the development of the Kimberly process. But we're still struggling, and that industry has actually now learned a lot from the
Mm.
electronics industry, taking what we learned in conflict minerals, the work that you highlighted, and really focusing on mitigation of human rights and seeing real action. But when you're looking at and talking to companies and they want to take these actions, are you seeing that they're having to balance customer satisfaction, quality, these sort of things, especially since you're looking at procurement versus ethical supply chain practices? Are you ever hitting these points of, not bad versus good, but maybe bad versus less bad? And how do you start talking to, companies about this value proposition of taking the ethical route?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think when we did slavery footprint and we saw that there was an uptick, we had this idea that, oh, the world needs an ethical brand and let's create it. We'll call it Made in a Free World because that's awesome. And tons of people were giving us money because we were a nonprofit and doing something good and on TV all the time. And we just kind of fumbled but the fumbling is what led us to creating an enterprise SaaS platform, because the fumbling was, well, what is good?
Yeah.
Like what does good look like? Like and can anyone ever get there? And can you stay there in a global supply chain that's got 8 million data points at any point? Can you guarantee? And then I started seeing organizations and even some governments putting laws that says you need to guarantee that your supply chain is slave free. You can't even guarantee it's pesticide free, even if it's organic. You don't know that something didn't blow from one field. Like, these are impossible goals. And so that really informed our philosophy on the theory of change for our company and helping our customers and bringing that philosophy to them as well, which is, we believe what good is, back to your point, is progress. And we have measurements of being able to, it's having your own responsibility as a company, doing the best that you can with your own policies and procedures and purchasing, investing in data resilience. So knowing more, connecting more, and then frankly, taking action. And we actually have a roll-up score that we're starting to give our customers where they can score themselves against each other, or against themselves and not against each other. It's not a game, but where they can keep track, because every innovation that we've done in our company has been driven by our customers saying, why don't you have this? Or can you just do this? So when I hear that customers are coming to us and they have a better idea for our product than we do, that tells me that they're really thinking about this, right? That tells me that they want, and we can't move fast enough to give them the tools that they need to be able to push deeper in. Every innovation that we've done, including now being able to add in sub-suppliers, that was driven by our customers going, this is great, but if I could just have this, then I could do this, and then I could take it to my boss, and he could do this. And I think that's really why, especially being a startup, we can be nimble and not just lean on, we're technology, we know better, but we can just lean into what our customers' needs are. And I think that's kind of listening to that and listening to the challenges that they have in order to, in many cases, and this, create the political will internally to move away from the compliance and move towards the responsibility. I think that's so much of the battle. There's this great story about when Dr. King went to meet with Lyndon Johnson to try to get the Voters' Rights Act passed. It was captured in the movie Selma. And years ago, a few of us that were working on modern slavery got to meet with Andrew Young, who was with King in that room. And what Ambassador Young said was, when LBJ said, no, I'm not going to do it. I've got all the responsibility, none of the power, blah, blah, blah. Can't get it done right now. And as they walked out, Dr. King was super quiet and had his head down, kind of looking dejected as they were walking out of the White House, the West Wing. And before they walked out of the gate, Dr. King stopped and said, we've got to get that man some power. And that's when they did Selma, the March on Selma. And what's genius about that is, if you really want to create change in an organization, you have to figure out who needs the power so that they can make the decision you want. And that takes an incredible amount of humility and strategy to be able to go, okay, this is blocked, and we can't just like rage against the machine that someone isn't doing it. We actually need to give them the power to make the decision. And so that's what I think a lot of what we try to do internally with these companies or with our customers is giving them the right information and the right power to be, be their best selves.
Wow, I really feel that through and through for so many reasons. And I'd love to keep playing with that, because I think sometimes companies themselves, even C-level people, will think they're in that same boat, that they need to get the power. And that is where I have seen really successful engagements with stakeholders, NGOs, and others to say, you define the target. You were saying earlier, like, what is ethical enough? When is it? And there are ways to say progress, and this is my progress metric. And I think that's where we are seeing better stakeholder engagement. I remember when we first started on conflict minerals and I was at the State Department, a lot of laggards of companies were listed on multiple lists out there. And then soon, within 5 years, they were the ones defining kind of global due diligence progress standards. And that ebbs and flows because a company can change leadership, and different progress in one material or supply chain may not be continued in others, but you're seeing that people feed on each other, and one actor can really enable and empower others. One of the best examples I have was when we started working with an association that was actually doing the tracking and due diligence of artisanal mining, particularly, but also the other mines in Eastern Congo. And they were reporting incidents, and not kind of okay incidents, the scary incidents, death, child labor, the real scary forced labor, conflict, illicit taxing, all the things that our legal counsels raise their eyebrows and say, please get away from that as soon as possible. And what Apple to this day is doing is they report on those and say that they're contributing to them and how they were addressed through the year. And Enough and Global Witness said that was what we wanted the whole time. We didn't know that's what we wanted, but that's what we wanted. We didn't know that was possible. And that, as you're talking, I'm realizing, one, just that organizational shift and the communication. How do we empower each other, and the companies and actors within the companies have multiple options? And then two, like, we really do have to make sure that perfect isn't the enemy of good action now. I don't remember the phrase you said earlier, but some version of, we have to be, taking this action now. Well, maybe, can you explain a little bit more about what your technology is, and your technology and other technologies that you're kind of excited about that are helping companies understand more, or helping governments or other stakeholders, and how you're doing kind of that interplay with those organizations?
Yeah, our technology, it essentially, maps out supply chains, does a predictive mapping. There were two things when we started when I was meeting with companies early before we built the technology. One thing that really stuck out with me, a chief procurement officer from a large publicly traded company. We did one of those stakeholders, business, NGO things in some Sheraton in New York, everyone talking. And one of the things that this chief procurement officer said is, look, you guys are always moving the goal line. Like, we need some way of being able to measure. And of course, I just went, oh, I'm going to figure that out. But the one thing that we felt like we could measure is helping a company just understand what they don't know. And that's big. It's not super cool. It's not something that's super tweetable or, would be a video, but it's the sock drawer. And so what we do is we take a company's spend data. So they just export what they're buying. I mean, we all have spend data. Some of it's in, QuickBooks or whatever we're using. And we're essentially, what the companies tell us what they buy, who they're buying from. and a little bit of data points, and we're able to build an entire heat map for their entire supply chain. And what that does, and then risk rank, and it gives them a way of being able to go, okay, where is the risk? What is the saliency? How big is the risk? And how proximate is it? So you can be buying electronics, but the reality is that the risk is way up in the supply chain. It's not really close, or the risk goes up as it goes deeper into the supply chain. So that's the first thing we do. Then we've built tools in which the customers can then start to engage the suppliers. I just believe that most people are good. I don't believe most people are bad. I think most people are good. And most people want to do the right thing. And all of us, myself included, need the motivation to do the right things, whether it's health apps or gym apps, whatever. We're naturally motivated to, like, when there's something kind of giving us treats along the way and giving us like rewards to motivate. So our technology has ways in which its suppliers can be invited into a process where it's good for them, because it's their buyer that's inviting them into the process and is going to motivate them. And quite frankly, the treat or the reward there is the strengthening of a relationship, a commercial relationship. And for us, the links in the supply chain, what the vision for what our company is to become the LinkedIn of supply chains, where we can create virtuous links where those relationships are stronger because of transparency and because of the shared values between them. And the verification of those values is something that technology can do to some degree. I think that eventually that moves into blockchain. I think there's been a lot of provenance-driven kind of blockchain or companies that are doing provenance of a specific vertical. We see this in jewelry elsewhere, which I think is the right thought. I think blockchain only works if you get participation. So it's kind of like putting a song on Spotify. It's only there if people listen to it. Anyone can do it, but you need participation in something if it's going to actually work. And so what we're doing is as a company is proving out the behavior that there is this desire for transparency. There's something in it for suppliers and buyers to share information and kind of blow up the the industrial kind of like the last century idea that supply chains are keeping secrets and your supply chains are a competitive advantage. That is not true anymore. Anything can be found. And so blowing up that idea and actually starting to create more transparency and being able to share that. One of the things our customers are saying is they'd like to see that, if a supplier has put a bunch of information up on Freedom, that supplier can be seen by other buyers in the network, meaning, hey, we're doing really good here. Also, code for, please don't send me another questionnaire asking the exact same questions that this other buyer asked me. We would like to just present what we do and how we're doing it and how we're improving once so that anyone can see it. And so that we built a platform, but we can just see that our customers are pulling us into becoming a network. And we're just at the beginning of that, but that's what's exciting, because look, you and I've worked in technology. We're in Silicon Valley. People throw lots of money to create squares trying to go into a circle, right? And it doesn't work. And so for us, we like to see when the market is telling us where to go. That's good for us as a company, but it's also just, it's good for what I believe is a movement.
Well, I'm really excited. And I think some of the work that you're talking about especially when it's shared learning spaces of how do you do this thing? And can someone over here brag about what they're doing so that someone over here can see the difference? Having that transparency, especially across supply chains, is rare. And oftentimes companies, they see a competitive advantage in doing certain sustainability practices, but basics shouldn't really be much in terms of competitive advantage. It's really a way of doing business, and then everything else is the cream on the crop. That we do have to share a lot more of those learnings. When we were working on some of the ethical recruitment practices in Southeast Asia and in China. And that's been across, it's just a continuous cycle, whether it be in toys, textiles, electronics. Some of the consistent things that I've seen is how little of that know-how gets transferred from supplier to supplier and then across industries. So I applaud you for that. I think it's a great opportunity, and especially if we can find ways that are, that interoperability, because it's one of the things that tech companies also do is we hold our data. So, SAP may have 10,000 GHG reports that my clients need, and my interoperability should be connecting, but how do we do that? And maybe I have, a diamond supply chain that could learn from those, different examples because regionally they're the same or whatnot. We'll have to find these ways, maybe you and I can kick that off together and get some conversations going in Silicon Valley on that. Well, I do have some questions coming in, and maybe let me open up to the audience to say, we're going to use the next 15 minutes for Q&A. The question that I have from an audience, and then maybe as a final one between our discussion, just we talked about different types of regulations vaguely. We just said there's regulations out there, and they span the gamut from just reporting and maybe annual or semi-annual types of reporting to potential risks for executives and other things, or incentives for executives and other things. The question here is, what type of government regulation is needed to improve transparency, to improve enforcement, to improve action? And what do you, let me get this exactly right. What do you think of, modern supply chain or modern slavery acts in the USA, Europe, Australia? Like, are you in favor of them? Do you feel like they're being productive? A lot of them still are in the math phase, but even things like the California Supply Chain and Transparency Act, there's common things, there's different things. So maybe if you can just give some comments to that.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be a small part of the California Supply Chain Transparency Act. Those letters that we were talking about 10, 12 years ago, they're written, we printed them out, and the group and Julia Ormond, the actress and activist who deserves to be mentioned in every conversation around this, because she was the first working on this. She was instrumental. Her and her associate, Allison Friedman, who worked at the State Department, they were the ones really drove to get the California Supply Chain Act passed here in California. And some of the letters that we sent to that people sent to companies were used for that. I think at the time when it came out, everyone expected it to fix everything. And what it did, and of course, who wouldn't love that? But what it did was it created a floor to build off of. And when we saw the UK Modern Slavery Act, which was patterned off of the California Act, that created way more scope, way more intensity. Again, it's had, I believe it's had the success that it's had is it's put it on the map for companies. And whether or not they've complied, or some companies haven't reported. And I think it's going to be harder and harder to defend not paying attention to these things, especially as it opened up in Australia, and we have an office in Australia serving companies. We've got some of the largest banks and insurance companies on our platform that are using it, that are using our technology to comply with the Australia Modern Slavery Act. That'll probably improve over time. Canada is likely going to do one as well. The US, Europe, and EU has got lots of multiple ones. Germany's working on a deep one. What I see is every iteration, it becomes a little bit more, and I don't even know if this is like competitiveness between countries. It's like, well, we're gonna have penalties on this one, or we're gonna do this. We're gonna be a little bit better. It's like great, but I think that the gestation of how of the intensity and the penalties for these, I'm impatient too, but I actually like that it's been like it's more disclosure, it's soft, figure it out, and it's becoming more intense. Now add with that what's really interesting here in the United States, which doesn't have a Modern Slavery Act yet, but Customs and Border Patrol are doing like really amazing work, seizing shipments of goods, t-shirts. There's news every week of something that they're doing, and it has a tremendous impact. And what that does is it puts companies on like a, yeah, we can take a chance and not care about this, or we can invest in transparency, because guess what? That's what CBP is looking for is, are you doing anything?
Yeah.
Are you looking, and frankly, are you doing something beyond the normal zero tolerance policy, spot audits, and trying to push that out, which is, again, if you think of the continuum, that's more towards compliance and not towards responsibility. I think all of them are looking to see that companies are getting off of their heels, their legal heels, and onto their responsible toes in terms of transparency in supply chains. That's what I'm saying.
I love that, because that's really what it is when you can get on your toes, all of a sudden you're defining the game, you're running forward, and you're no longer chasing and pushing back.
Right.
So I think that's a really great way to say it. The next question is, and this I think will go into the many definitions of what modern slavery is when we're talking about human trafficking,
Right.
forced, recruitment fees, the many sub bullets that fall into that very large umbrella. This question says, what role do multinationals have in ensuring that their suppliers and other tiers in the supply chain fairly compensate their workers? And as I hear this, I'm thinking of examples from the electronics industry in the last 5 years, just about paying back recruitment fees, but that's not necessarily consistently done across the industry or multiple industries or even within one company. So I don't know if you have examples, or you want to talk about what role do they have, or how could they engage?
Look, I think pick one thing for companies to do. Ensuring responsible recruitment and ethical recruitment is happening in your supply chain beyond tier one. So working with your sub-tier suppliers to build in ethical recruitment, not just practices, but proof, goes a long way. What a lot of us don't understand, I mean, I grew up in California, like, I don't know what it's, if I want a job, I can get a job. If I want a job taking, like, it may not be the job I want, but I've got like so many opportunities to have a job. What a lot of us don't realize is that's not the case most places in the world. And like the idea of a job is actually, 3,000 kilometers away in a place that you don't speak the language. And that in and of itself, slavery preys on vulnerability. And we haven't really talked about COVID and the impact on that, on what that's, we're all still kind of like slowly coming back and kind of getting out there and still having debates about masks and all that craziness. But like, what we're seeing is going to see we've got like 1.2, 1.4 billion kids not in school. That's not like, oh, bummer, they didn't learn math this year. That's they may not ever go back. Their parents might not ever have a job. What's happening in India and the way it's set India back economically, which India's economic situation improves, so does that reduces exploitation. So what COVID has done, and the ILO's put out quite a few reports, it's pushed us back. So vulnerabilities, frankly, we're not seeing it because we can't pay attention to it right now because we're paying attention to other things. It's gone up. And so I feel this like huge intensity, not just as a CEO of a venture-backed startup, which has its own intensity, but I have this intensity of like why I started this, which is like, holy crap, we've got to get transparent supply chains, because the vulnerable workforce that is out there that is being exploited, whether wages are being held back or they're having to pay recruitment fees or they can't leave or they're not being paid at all. Like, that is going to happen, and probably happen a lot more, because we're also focused on getting out of this pandemic in the first world. So I think that we can't move fast enough to be able to build transparency in supply chains to protect the vulnerable.
I couldn't agree more. I think we forget how, that teetering point of how many people are in the modern slavery world, that can jump 10 million in, overnight with these sort of risks. And when you have natural disasters and these other things, when we were really talking about some of the issues going on in the cobalt supply chain with child labor, that's a poverty driven situation. It's not necessarily mass exploitation of groups of actors trying to take on groups of children. This is a poverty-driven dynamic where parents and families are making horrible choices that no one should have to be put into. So the COVID exacerbation of these high vulnerabilities and that teetering point is really terrifying. And I think you're right. We're just starting to wake up and be able to look beyond just our immediate risks in our regions and our families, and see the world bigger. Some of my wonderful coders in India actually developed something that just taking on different ways of being able to identify tweets so that you could get a respirator and ventilators and other things as soon as you could in regions. And we have so little because of modern slavery being such a hidden, and sometimes very apparent, but also very hidden phenomena that I think you're exactly right. We'll have to really dig in. Well, and I think this goes to this, as we're opening up, one of the questions was, how do you stay resilient, motivated, and not get burned out? Maybe this is something that I've definitely gone through rounds of burnout in my career, and a lot of times that takes different shifts. What are some of the things that you focus on and work with your clients on?
Well, this isn't coffee. No, just kidding. I'm just, it is coffee, and coffee does help me with my resilience. It's a great question, and I've been doing this for a while. And I think I've, in all fairness, if I'm being honest with myself, I think I've had loose patches in the road of like depression, and because it's that it always seems impossible until it's done. And let's be honest, justice is never done. Like, we don't get to put a bow on it and say, cool, let's just let's all go have a picnic. And so I think that one of the things that gives me personal and professional resilience is just having great people around, and people that frankly don't do what I do, don't understand it, don't really want to hear about white papers and procurement, but understand and both outside of my my professional world, and just I've got an incredible network of people who frankly love me and care about me, and I love them. And so that's big. But also inside the world that work in, I've got people that love me there too, like Ambassador Sidabaka, who's I worked with at the State Department. Like, we're dear friends, and he will text me just to check on me and stuff. Like, these are those kinds of relationships where the love is and the care is, like, those need to be nurtured. That is one of the best things you can do to create change in the world, is nurture loving relationships.
Oh, well, excellent. Amen to that. We have one more question, and I don't want to jump from that wonderful sentiment, because it's truly something that I think people need to be taking into account if they're really diving into this work, because it's a hell of a lot. So the last question is, when looking to the value proposition of why companies should dig into their supply chain for greater transparency, how do you quantify the tech spend? Great question. Is there operational efficiency outside of the reputational risk or the good to have responsible? Can you sell this as a vitamin or as a painkiller? Or should you sell it as a vitamin or a painkiller? Great way to phrase it.
It's perfect. And when I started to try to raise money for this, many venture capitalists in Sand Hill Row said, "You're selling a vitamin. No one wants vitamins. No one wants transparency in their supply chains." And I'm like, "But vitamins are great." And you're like, "Yeah, no, I can't invest in a vitamin."
Invest in a vitamin.
No, but it's different now. It's medicinal. Every one of our customers has to comply with something somewhere, sometimes multiple. And so in that case, what we provide them is a medicine. And it's a progressive medicine, right? It's staged. They have to not just report. This isn't one of those, again, it's not a compliance. This is what's great about some of these modern slavery acts, is you have to report every year on your progress. So you can look at your policies and procedures and hire a consultancy to do all that, and cool, great job, year one, done. What are you going to do next year? Where can you,
Yep.
the only way you can go is to go through it, go deep, look at the true truth of the supply chain. That's why we call our company Freedom, is in truth, there is freedom. And so you can look into, you have to be able to look deeper into it. So the argument of, is this, what kind of investment, all the rest of it, we've got tons of slides that we can talk about value proposition of, doing this yourself. Sometimes we have to kind of let our customers figure that out for themselves, or prospects figure that out for themselves, where they just kind of want to, it really depends on who's control. Is the general counsel in control? Is head of financing control, or head of responsibility and control? And then they kind of figure that out. Eventually they get to, yeah, we've got to start understanding what's in our supply chain. And so I do believe that we started off, and I think that's maybe some of the best products in the world. I mean, I think you can argue that Tesla was once a vitamin.
Yeah,
I don't compare
exactly.
ourselves to them, but I think that some of the best products in the world start off as vitamins, and then they just become medicinal.
Well, with that, I think this has been a wonderful conversation. We could talk for many hours. I'm still going to grab you for coffee, and we finally will make it happen. Okay. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm happy to continue the conversation separately. Thank you, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for having me.